The sun stretched across the parade ground in molten gold, drawing long shadows from rows of boots planted in unyielding sand. The heat shimmered like a living thing, curling around every figure in formation. Among them stood Elena Ramirez, her posture a perfect reflection of discipline, shoulders squared, chin held level, but her heartbeat drummed a restless cadence against her ribs. This was not the day she expected. She had been called out without warning, the murmur rippling through the ranks like a whispering wind. Soldiers turned, some with confusion, others with faint smirks, as if expecting her to falter. In the military, perception was a currency, and today, every glance carried a debt she was determined not to owe. "Step forward," came the voice, firm, cold, unquestionable. The captain's tone had a weight that left no space for hesitation. Elena obeyed, her boots crunching on the gravel. Each step sent a tremor through her chest, not from fear but from something older, deeper, a sense of being measured, of standing on ground that demanded proof of worth. She halted in the open, the center of a circle drawn by judgment. Around her, hands rose like arrows, fingers pointing without words. "You don't belong here." The accusation wasn't spoken aloud, but she felt it in the set of their jaws, the sharpness of their eyes. And then came the command, soft yet cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Leave the training ground." The words hung heavy, pressing against the air. Elena felt the weight of silence coil around her, waiting to crush or break her spirit. For a fleeting second, her breath faltered, catching on the edge of something sharp, memory, pride, defiance. The instinct to retreat flickered, but it died as quickly as it came, because she knew who she was. And no order born of doubt could rewrite that truth. Her fingers, steady as stone, reached for the hem of her shirt. Slowly, deliberately, she tugged the fabric down from her collarbone, revealing ink that spoke louder than any uniform could. A winged cross, etched in black, stretched like a whispered promise across her skin. It wasn't decoration. It was history carved into flesh, a memory of nights when life and death were one breath apart, of comrades whose voices now lived only in silence. Every line of that tattoo was a name, a story, a vow. The sunlight caught the ink, making it gleam as if alive. Around her, the whispers stilled. Boots shifted, throats cleared, but no one spoke. And then, just as the tension began to coil tighter, the captain moved. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his shadow falling across the emblem on her skin. His eyes, sharp as a blade moments ago, now softened, just barely, but enough to unmask the truth of recognition. He had seen that symbol before, worn by the few who had walked through fire and returned carrying the weight of others who couldn't. For a moment, time stretched thin between them, fragile and suspended. The desert wind stirred, carrying a scent of dust and steel, as if the earth itself waited for his next breath. Elena held his gaze, her chin lifting an inch higher, not in defiance, but in quiet affirmation of everything she had endured to stand here. There was no anger in her eyes, only the unyielding gravity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The captain didn't speak at once. His jaw shifted, his brow folding slightly, as though recalibrating the lines between order and respect. And then, with a voice stripped of its earlier edge, he said only one word. "Stay." The syllable was soft, almost an echo, yet it fell with the force of an unspoken apology. Around them, the silence fractured, not into noise, but into something gentler, like tension unraveling thread by thread. The hands that had pointed now dropped, almost sheepishly, to their sides. Elena didn't smile. Not because she wasn't relieved she was, but because this was never about winning. It was about truth, about anchoring herself against tides that sought to wash her away. Slowly, she adjusted her shirt back over her shoulder, the tattoo now veiled but never erased. Some things were too deeply etched to fade, whether in ink or in spirit. When the formation resumed, boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm, her heart steadied into its own cadence. Not of doubt, not of fear, but of belonging earned in silence, through scars unseen by most. As the sun dipped lower, casting amber threads across the field, Elena inhaled deeply, the air heavy with heat and promise. She knew this wasn't the end of proving herself, far from it, but in that quiet exchange, something had shifted. Not just in their eyes, but in hers. She would carry that moment like the ink on her skin, a vow unbroken, a story unfinished, a strength that spoke without shouting. The barracks were quiet that night, except for the low hum of the ceiling fan slicing through heavy summer air. Elena sat on the edge of her bunk, her boots resting on the cool cement floor, laces loosened but not removed. Her posture, rigid, almost statuesque, belied the storm twisting beneath her skin. Outside, distant voices trailed like shadows along the corridor, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal and the faint cadence of drills long past sunset. The day's events lingered in her bones, not as a triumph, but as an unspoken reminder. Belonging here was fragile, a thread stretched taut between pride and judgment. She stared at her hands, calloused and rough, mapped with tiny scars that told stories only she knew. They had gripped rifles under moonless skies, carried weight no human should bear, and yet, somehow, those same hands were now questioned. Not for what they had endured, but for who they belonged to. From her locker, an old photograph peeked out, edges curled, its surface dulled by time. 3 faces smiled back at her, their uniforms crisp, their eyes bright with a kind of hope that only existed before the first bullet sings. Elena touched the picture gently, tracing the outline of the man on the left, Santos. His laughter still echoed in her memory, deep and warm, like an anchor in chaos. But that sound lived only in memory now, silenced by a blast that turned their last mission into a graveyard of dust and metal. The tattoo on her shoulder throbbed, not in pain but in memory. Every line of ink held their names, her silent way of carrying them forward when the world moved on. It was her vow that they would not be forgotten, that her skin would bear what her soul could not voice. And yet, here she was, reduced to proving that vow was not a weakness. A knock broke the stillness, sharp, deliberate. Before she could answer, the door creaked open, and the captain stepped in. His presence filled the narrow space, not with authority this time, but with something quieter, heavier. For a moment, he said nothing, simply closing the door behind him as the barracks settled into a deeper hush. "Ramirez," he began, his tone softer than the desert wind outside. "Walk with me." There was no command in his words, only an invitation. Elena rose, sliding into her boots with silent precision, following him out into the night. The air smelled of dust and iron, mingled with the faint sweetness of something blooming in the far-off fields. Above, stars sprawled across the black canopy like shards of glass, sharp and infinite. They walked past the training grounds, now ghostly under moonlight, the same earth where judgment had flared hours ago. Neither spoke at first. The only sounds were their boots against gravel and the distant hum of generators. Finally, the captain halted near the edge of the perimeter, where the fences stretched like skeletal fingers into the dark. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "What happened today, it shouldn't have." Elena studied his profile, the sharp angles softened by shadows.
She didn't speak.
"Not yet. When I saw that tattoo," his voice wavered, just slightly, "I remembered the unit. The missions no one talks about anymore. You were there, weren't you?" She nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "I was." He turned then, really looking at her, not as a soldier in formation, but as a person shaped by battles both seen and unseen. There was no pity in his gaze, only a recognition that felt heavier than any reprimand. "They didn't know," he murmured. "Hell, even I didn't until I saw it." Elena's lips parted, but the words came out softer than she intended. "I didn't put it there for them to know." She paused, feeling the night press close, the weight of unspoken ghosts. "It's not about proving anything. It's about remembering." The captain's jaw tightened, as though her words struck something deep and unresolved within him. Memory, he said, almost to himself. We carry it like a shield or like chains. He exhaled slowly, the breath curling into the cool air. You've carried enough. For the first time that day, something inside Elena shifted. Not relief, not forgiveness, but a quiet sense of being seen. Not as a challenge, not as a question, but as a truth that stood on its own. They walked back in silence, the kind that spoke louder than words. As the barracks loomed ahead, the captain stopped once more, his voice steady now. You belong here, Ramirez. Not because of your past, because of who you are. She met his gaze, letting the weight of his words settle into the spaces where doubt had tried to root. And though she didn't smile, her eyes softened, carrying a glint of something fragile yet fierce, like light bending through glass. When she returned to her bunk, the photograph still waited, its faces unchanged. She touched it one last time before tucking it safely away. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new whispers, new walls to break through. But tonight, as she lay back and stared at the ceiling fan slicing through shadows, Elena allowed herself a single breath of stillness. Not peace, not yet, but something close. Something like hope. Dawn broke in muted shades of amber and rose, spilling across the horizon like a quiet promise. The camp stirred slowly, boots thudding against concrete, distant orders cutting through morning haze, the low hum of machinery awakening with the day. Elena rose before the bugle, as she always did, her body moving through the motions of discipline like second nature. Yet, beneath that precision, something felt altered. Yesterday had left a mark, not visible like the ink on her skin, but lodged deep within the quiet of her thoughts. She laced her boots in silence, fingers tugging each knot with practiced care. Outside, the air was sharp, filled with the mingled scent of metal, oil, and the faint sweetness of dew. Her shadows stretched long against the earth as she stepped into formation, the first hints of sunlight brushing her cheek. She carried no outward trace of uncertainty. Every line of her posture spoke strength, but inside, questions lingered like ghosts at the edge of dawn. Would they still see her the same way? Would whispers slither through ranks like smoke? The tattoo might have silenced one doubt, but the world was never short of more. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the rhythm of boots striking gravel, rifles clinking against shoulders, the sharp cadence of commands echoing across the grounds. This was where she belonged, if belonging could be earned in sweat, scars, and the will to endure. Training began hard that day. Obstacle courses sprawled across the field like an unforgiving maze, every station a test of grit and precision. The rope climb rose before her, thick coils slick with morning damp, towering against the pale sky. Elena grasped it without hesitation, muscles flexing as she hoisted herself upward, inch by relentless inch. Each pull burned, but she welcomed the fire. It was proof she was still here, still unbroken. Halfway up, voices drifted from below. Low at first, then clearer. Think she'll make it? One said, laced with skepticism. She's tougher than she looks, another replied, not unkindly. Elena didn't glance down. She drove upward, jaw tight, breath hissing between clenched teeth. At the top, she hooked a leg over, hauling herself onto the wooden beam. The world stretched wide from there, fields rolling out in muted green, the barracks crouched like sentinels, the distant line of mountains painted in steel and lavender. For a heartbeat, she let the wind wash over her, cool and raw, a balm against the heat coursing through her veins. Then she descended, steady and sure, boots thudding against earth with quiet finality. The day wore on, drills folding into one another, the sun climbing higher, its weight pressing like molten iron against the skin. Sweat streaked her temples, dampened her shirt, but she moved through it all with a fierce, quiet resolve. Not to prove them wrong. She'd learned long ago that chasing validation was a hollow victory, but to honor the promise inked on her shoulder, the memory etched into her soul. By late afternoon, the field lay strewn with exhaustion, soldiers sprawled in patches of shade, water bottles drained to the last drop. Elena sank to the ground, her back against a weathered crate, chest heaving in measured bursts. She tipped her head back, eyes tracing the vast, unbroken blue overhead. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of calm threaded through her, a fragile thing, but real. That was when the captain approached. He didn't speak at once, just lowered himself to sit a few feet away, his elbows resting on his knees. For a long moment, they shared the silence, the kind that hummed not with tension, but with unspoken understanding. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Years ago. Same eyes. Same fire." Elena turned her head slightly, curiosity shadowing her features. "What happened to them?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Didn't make it back." The words hung heavy, softened only by the rough edge of grief that clung to them. "Carried more than anyone should. Like you." She looked away then, toward the horizon where the sun bled into gold and crimson. "We all carry something," she murmured, fingers brushing the fabric over her tattoo. "Some of us just wear it where the world can see." The captain followed her gaze, his silence, saying what words could not. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, a gesture not of command, but of respect. In that nod lived an acknowledgement that went beyond rank, beyond rules, a recognition of battles fought in shadows, victories measured not in medals, but in survival. As the bugle sounded in the distance, calling them back, Elena rose, dust clinging to her boots. She felt the weight of the day settle over her, not crushing, but grounding, like roots anchoring deep into the soil. When she walked toward the barracks, the air carried a different note, not of whispers, but of quiet regard. Some eyes still followed her, but their sharpness had dulled, replaced by something else. Something closer to understanding. Night would come, and with it, the memories, faces framed in smoke and fire, voices echoing in dreams. But for now, under a sky aflame with dying light, Elena allowed herself a single truth. She was still standing. And that, in itself, was a victory. Morning unfolded gently across the camp, painting the world in pale gold and hushed blue. The air carried the crispness of a day unspoiled, though beneath its stillness lingered the hum of drills and duty waiting to begin. Elena stood alone near the edge of the grounds, her gaze fixed on the line where earth kissed sky. Beyond that horizon lay everything she had endured, everything she had lost, and everything she still carried. Her fingers brushed the fabric over her shoulder, where the ink slept unseen beneath her uniform. The tattoo had always been more than art. It was a memory etched in permanence, a silent roll call for names the wind no longer spoke. Some days, it felt like armor. Other days, like chains. Today, it was something in between. Heavy, but steady, like a weight that kept her rooted when the world threatened to shift. Behind her, life stirred, voices rising in clipped commands, boots drumming out a rhythm of obedience. Yet for this moment, she let herself linger in stillness, inhaling the scent of iron and dew, letting the wind play through the stray strands of hair that had slipped from her bun. It was rare, this quiet, and in its rare grace, her thoughts uncoiled. She remembered laughter, loud and reckless, spilling from a mess hall years ago. Remembered the sharp sting of gunfire slicing through darkness, the ringing silence that followed. Remembered the night when Santos whispered, "We make it through this. Drinks are on me." He never bought those drinks. Neither did Torres. Their voices had faded, but their absence carved valleys inside her that no time could fill. And yet, here she stood. Not unscarred, but unbroken. Perhaps that was the lesson, the truth no manual ever taught. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about carrying what could not be changed and still finding the courage to move forward. The crunch of boots pulled her back. She turned to see the captain approaching, his silhouette framed by the rising sun, casting his shadow long across the ground. He walked without the stiffness of command now. His stride was measured, almost easy, like someone leaving rank behind for a while. You're up early, he said, a faint smile ghosting across his face. Old habits, Elena replied, her voice calm, carrying none of yesterday's edge. Some things don't change. He stopped beside her, hands resting lightly on his hips as he followed her gaze toward the horizon. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was different now, not heavy, not brittle, but expansive, like space carved for understanding. I read your file last night, he said finally. The missions. The commendations. What you carried back. His tone held no judgment, only quiet reverence. I should have known sooner. Elena's lips curved, not into a smile, but something softer, like a crack of light through clouds. You weren't supposed to. None of them were. She exhaled, slow and steady. The past, it belongs where it is. I'm not here to wear it like a badge. He looked at her then, really looked, as if the words drew something unseen into focus.
Maybe.
But what you've endured, it matters.
To me.
To this place. He paused, his voice dipping lower. To those who need someone to remind them that strength doesn't always shout. For the first time, Elena let herself hold his gaze without the barrier of rank. In his eyes, she saw no pity, only recognition, and something quieter still, respect, born from the same soil of loss and resilience that bound them in silence. When the bugle sounded, its sharp cry slicing through the soft edge of dawn, the moment folded into motion. Soldiers began converging on the grounds, voices rising, boots pounding. Elena straightened, the instinct of discipline flowing through her like muscle memory. The captain turned to leave, but before he did, he said something that lingered like a promise. You're not just part of this unit, Ramirez. You're part of its spine. The words landed with the weight of truth, unexpected, unadorned, yet anchoring something deep inside her. When he walked away, his figure melting into the tide of uniforms, Elena stood a breath longer, the horizon now tinged with fire and possibility. Later, during drills, she moved with quiet ferocity, not for approval, not for validation, but for herself. Each stride, each breath, was a thread in a tapestry only she could weave, a testament to the truth that strength could be silent, resilience could be unseen, and worth was never measured by whispers. As the day waned and dusk settled like ink across the camp, Elena returned to her bunk. The photograph waited where she'd left it, its edges curled like petals kissed by time. She traced the faces once more, then tucked it gently beneath her pillow. Lying back, she closed her eyes, listening to the hum of life around her. The muted chatter, the distant thud of boots, the low murmur of a world that kept turning. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried no nightmares, only fragments of something gentler. Tomorrow would bring its own weight, its own questions. But tonight, as stars pricked holes in the sky and the wind slipped through open windows, Elena felt something stir, a fragile, flickering ember she had almost forgotten.
Hope.
Not loud, not blazing, but enough to light the dark. The day began with the taste of iron on the wind and the low hum of engines warming in the distance. A convoy stood waiting at the edge of the camp, sunlight glinting off metal like shards of fire. Today was different. Every soldier could feel it in the air, in the clipped voices of command, in the way silence threaded between their movements. It wasn't training anymore.
It was the real thing.
Elena stood by her vehicle, the coarse fabric of her gloves biting against her palms as she adjusted her grip on the rifle. The weight of it was familiar, grounding, as if the steel remembered every mission it had seen, every battle it had survived. Around her, the chatter was minimal, just the muted scrape of boots, the metallic thud of gear being checked for the last time. She inhaled deeply, letting the scent of dust and diesel settle in her lungs. For a moment, it was almost comforting. Almost. The captain approached, his shadow stretching long against the hard-packed earth. His voice, when it came, was calm, not sharp with authority, but steady like a bridge spanning a storm. You good, Ramirez? She met his eyes. In them, she saw not just command, but the weight of someone who understood that questions like this were never about logistics. They were about the soul, about whether the heart could bear what the body was about to do. "I'm good," she said simply. No bravado, no deflection, just the truth, pared down to its bone. He nodded once, then moved on, his presence leaving a faint echo of reassurance in his wake. Elena turned her gaze to the horizon, where the mountains loomed like silent sentinels under a rising sun. Beyond them lay their objective, a region fractured by violence, where survival wasn't promised and choices cut like glass. As the engines roared to life, the earth trembled beneath her boots. She climbed into the vehicle, the seat creaking under her weight, and secured her rifle across her chest. The convoy rolled forward, kicking up plumes of dust that curled like smoke, swallowing the camp until it was nothing but a blur in the rearview mirror. Ahead, the road stretched like an unspooling thread into the vast, merciless unknown. The rhythm of motion, tires grinding against gravel, the hum of gears shifting, became a strange kind of lullaby. Elena stared out the window, watching the land unravel in muted tones of ochre and rust. Her mind wandered, not to fear, but to memory. To laughter echoing in mess halls long gone. To voices silenced too soon. To the ink etched into her skin, carrying names that would never answer roll call again. She touched it briefly, fingers pressing over the fabric, as if anchoring herself to the lives she carried forward. Hours bled into one another. The sun climbed, scorching the metal skin of the vehicles, turning the inside into a furnace of breath and sweat. When they finally halted, it was in a valley rimmed with jagged stone, the air brittle with heat and the metallic scent of tension. Orders came swift and precise, slicing through the hum of idling engines. Soldiers moved like clockwork, checking gear, securing perimeters, eyes sweeping terrain with predator focus. Elena dismounted, boots crunching on gravel that glittered under the sun. The heat pressed against her like a second skin, seeping through every layer until even her bones felt singed. She scanned the horizon, a vast emptiness fractured by shadow and light, and felt the weight of what lay ahead settle into her chest like a stone. Then came the sound, faint at first, then swelling into a roar. Gunfire cracked the stillness wide open, sharp and relentless, ricocheting off stone like angry sparks. The world tilted into chaos. Voices barked commands, boots pounded earth, the air tore with the metallic scream of bullets slicing through space. Elena moved without thought, muscle memory taking the reins, dropping to cover, returning fire, her breath sinking with the rhythm of survival. Dust clawed at her lungs, stung her eyes, blurred the sharp edges of reality. Around her, shadows lunged and fell, the ground trembling under the weight of violence. Time fractured into shards, each second a lifetime, each breath a borrowed miracle. Somewhere, a voice cried out. Somewhere else, silence swallowed another name. And through it all, Elena moved, swift, precise, unyielding, like a blade forged in fire. When the storm finally broke, it left a silence so vast it roared louder than the chaos that came before. Smoke coiled in the air, carrying the acrid tang of gunpowder and loss. The sun dipped low, bleeding amber and crimson across a sky that had seen too much. Soldiers regrouped, their faces streaked with sweat and dust, their eyes hollowed by things words could never hold. Elena stood among them, her rifle hanging loose in her grip, her breath sawing in and out like torn cloth. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where darkness seeped in like ink, swallowing the last embers of day. And in that darkness, she felt something stir, a memory, a vow, a truth etched as deep as the ink on her skin. She had survived. Again. But survival was never the whole story. It was what came after, the rebuilding, the remembering, that tested the soul. As the convoy prepared to move, as engines rumbled back to life, Elena cast one last look at the valley, its silence heavy with what it had taken. Then she climbed into the vehicle, her movements slow but steady, and let the horizon pull her forward. Night fell like a curtain, and the road stretched on, endless and unyielding. But somewhere beyond that darkness, beyond the jagged teeth of mountains, lay something fragile and fierce, waiting to be claimed. Not peace. She wasn't naive enough to call it that. But hope. The quiet kind that burns low, steady, refusing to die. And for Elena Ramirez, that was enough.